Hi guys, it's Miss Hall here, and today we're going to learn about ancient Egypt. By the end of this video, you should be able to explain the geographic features and regions of Egypt, identify the major events of the three kingdoms of Egypt, including what led to their decline, and define the terms delta, dynasty, and pharaoh. Make sure you take good notes. By far, the most important geographical feature in Egypt is the Nile River. In fact, Egypt is often called the gift of the Nile because without the Nile River, the civilization of Egypt would not have existed. Now, the Nile has two features that make it sort of unique. One is that it flows from south to north, where it empties into the Mediterranean, and that's unusual. The other is that it floods regularly, and that regular flooding is actually what allowed a civilization to develop. It gave fertilizer to the farmlands that were there around the Nile. So if you look at these pictures, you'll see that really close, as close as 10 miles to the Nile, there's desert. And if it weren't for the Nile and its flooding, the civilization of farmers wouldn't have been able to exist. The Nile served as a very important trade route from Egypt into the Mediterranean, into Africa, into Asia, into the Middle East. It was very, very important. And it was divided into two distinct regions, Upper Egypt, which is in the south, and Lower Egypt, which is in the north. Now, Lower Egypt was mostly composed of that delta area, that triangular area where the river empties into the Mediterranean Sea. It may seem backwards that Upper Egypt is south, but remember, the Nile flows from south to north, and so Upper Egypt is actually upriver from Lower Egypt. This allowed traders from inside the continent to have easy access into the Mediterranean Sea. The history of ancient Egypt is divided into three distinct time periods. The Old Kingdom, which was from 2700 BC to 2200 BC, the Middle Kingdom from 2050 BC to 1800 BC, and the New Kingdom from 1550 BC to 1100 BC. During this time, Egypt passed from one dynasty or ruling family to another, but it mostly remained united. During the Old Kingdom, Egyptian rulers called pharaohs organized a really strong centralized state, and the pharaohs claimed to have divine support for their rules, and the Egyptians believed that the pharaoh actually was a god, and thus he had complete power. He owned and ruled everything in the kingdom. He did have important people that he depended on, including his viziers, who had a lot of power, but he was the supreme political and religious leader. It was during the Old Kingdom that the Egyptians built the pyramids at Giza. Those are considered to be the greatest known symbol of Egypt. And the pyramids served as tombs. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and they preserved the body of their dead rulers and everything that they would need in the afterlife. And the pyramids took a really long time to build, so often a pharaoh would begin building his pyramid the minute he inherited the throne. And the pyramids are really a great symbol of the strength and the organization of these ancient Egyptian civilizations. Those pyramids were very costly to build, and part of what contributed to the fall of the Old Kingdom was the expense of the pyramids. There were also a lot of power struggles between the leaders and some crop failures, which led to some pretty unhappy people. And so after more than a century of all sorts of disarray and collapse, some new pharaohs began to unite the land, and that ushered in what we call the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom was a really turbulent period. The Nile was not flooding as regularly as it had before. There was a lot of corruption and rebellion. There were a few strong leaders who did organize a really large drainage project, which created a lot of new farmable land. And Egyptian armies were able to conquer part of Nubia, which was a really gold-rich land in the south. And traders also began to have more contact with people in the Middle East and the Mediterranean islands, but it was still somewhat of a volatile time. Then, around 1700 BC, catastrophe struck. There were foreign invaders, the Hyksos, and they came down from the north and began to occupy the Delta region, and the Egyptians were really awed by their horse-drawn chariots and all of their military power. And they took over Egypt for a time, and it took almost 100 years before the Egyptians were able to drive out the Hyksos. But eventually, they did drive them out, and they set up what we call the New Kingdom. Now, during the New Kingdom, there were a lot of really powerful and ambitious pharaohs, and this is when the Egyptian empire really spread. And at its height, it reached all the way over to the Euphrates River, as you can see here in this picture. This age of conquest really brought Egypt into greater contact with Asia and other parts of Africa. One really powerful monarch of the New Kingdom was Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut was actually a woman, which is pretty surprising. And she had all the rights of a pharaoh. She encouraged trade, and she ruled over the kingdom from 1503 BC to 1482 BC. Another very important leader of the New Kingdom was Ramses II. Ramses was actually the most powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom, and he ruled between 1290 BC and 1224 BC. He's the guy that actually pushed Egyptian rule to the northeast all the way to the Euphrates River. He eventually was defeated in a battle against the Hittites in Asia Minor, and even though he was very brave, the Egyptians still suffered a crushing defeat. And after years of fighting, they did eventually sign a peace treaty with the Hittites, but Egyptian power slowly began to decline, especially after the death of Ramses II. There were invasions by the Assyrians and the Persians, and then later the Greeks and the Romans. And Egypt was never as united of a nation again as it was under Ramses II. Well, that wraps up what we need to know about Egypt. Make sure to review, take good notes, and be ready for a quiz.